The rain hammered against the cracked pavement as Sarah Chen stumbled through the narrow alley behind the downtown bar. Her ribs screamed with every breath, and warm blood trickled from the cut above her left eye. The three men who had cornered her outside were now lying unconscious against the brick wall, their faces bearing the evidence of her unexpected resistance. Sarah had learned long ago that looking small and defenseless could be an advantage. At barely 5 feet tall with delicate features, most people underestimated her completely. The men who had followed her from the bar tonight had made that same fatal mistake. They saw an easy target, a young woman walking alone after her shift as a hospital nurse. They had no idea that beneath her scrubs lay muscles honed by years of training, or that her gentle hands knew exactly where to strike to disable an attacker. The first man had grabbed her shoulder, spinning her around with a leering grin. "Hey there, sweetheart. Where are you going in such a hurry?" His breath reeked of alcohol and cigarettes. Sarah had tried to walk away, but his friends had blocked her path. That's when she knew talking wouldn't save her. The confrontation lasted less than 2 minutes. Sarah moved with fluid precision, using their size against them. When the first man reached for her again, she grabbed his wrist, twisted it at an impossible angle, and drove her knee into his solar plexus. As he doubled over gasping, she spun and caught the second attacker with an elbow to his throat. The third man, seeing his friends fall, had pulled out a knife. That's when Sarah's training truly kicked in. She disarmed him with a move that would have impressed her old instructor, but not before the blade caught her across the forearm. The final attacker went down hard when Sarah swept his legs and used his own momentum to slam him into the wall. Now they lay still, breathing but unconscious, while Sarah tried to assess her own injuries. Her arm throbbed where the knife had sliced through her jacket, and she could feel blood seeping through the fabric. The cut above her eye made her vision blurry, and her ribs felt like they might be cracked from when one of the men had managed to land a punch. But she was alive, and she was free. Sarah pulled out her phone with shaking hands, debating whether to call the police or just disappear into the night. She had learned to handle problems on her own, to never rely on others for help. It was a lesson taught by necessity, not choice. But as she stood there bleeding in the rain, surrounded by the aftermath of violence, she realized she might need medical attention whether she wanted it or not. The sound of footsteps at the mouth of the alley made her freeze. Someone else was coming, and she didn't know if they were friend or foe. Sarah positioned herself defensively, ready to fight again if necessary, even though every muscle in her body protested. She had survived this long by being prepared for anything. The figure that emerged from the shadows was tall and broad-shouldered, moving with the confident stride of someone comfortable with dangerous situations. As he stepped into the dim light from the street lamp, Sarah could see he was wearing military-style clothing. His dark hair was cropped short, and his eyes quickly took in the scene. The unconscious men, Sarah's defensive stance, and the blood staining her clothes. "Ma'am, are you all right?" His voice was calm and professional, with no hint of judgment or surprise at the chaos around them. Sarah noticed he kept his hands visible and maintained a respectful distance, clearly recognizing that she might see him as another threat. Sarah's instinct was to lie, to say she was fine and walk away. But the pain in her ribs was getting worse, and she could feel herself starting to shake from adrenaline crash and shock. "I've been better," she managed to say, her voice steadier than she felt. The man nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. "I'm Jake Morrison. I'm a Navy SEAL medic. Would you mind if I took a look at those injuries?" He gestured toward her bleeding arm and the cut on her face. "No pressure, but you've got some bleeding that should be addressed." Sarah studied him carefully. Everything about his demeanor suggested he was exactly who he claimed to be: calm, competent, and genuinely concerned for her welfare. But trust didn't come easily to her, especially not in situations like this. "I can take care of myself," she said, though the words lacked conviction. Jake's expression remained neutral, but she caught something in his eyes, not pity, but understanding. "I'm sure you can," he said quietly. "Question is, should you have to?" He glanced at the 3 unconscious men. "Looks like you handled this situation pretty well on your own. But sometimes accepting help isn't about what you can do. It's about what you don't have to do alone." Those words hit something deep inside Sarah that she had buried long ago. She had been handling things alone for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to have someone offer help without expecting something in return. The rain continued to fall, washing the blood from her face and mixing with tears she didn't realize she was shedding. Sarah found herself nodding before she could stop herself. Jake moved slowly, telegraphing every motion as he approached. From his bag, he pulled out a compact medical kit that looked far more sophisticated than anything she had seen outside of a hospital. His hands were steady and sure as he examined the cut on her arm, carefully rolling up her torn sleeve. "This is going to need stitches," he said matter-of-factly, "but I can clean and bandage it for now. The head wound looks worse than it is. Scalp cuts always bleed a lot." As he worked, his touch was gentle but efficient. Sarah found herself studying his face in the dim light. There were lines around his eyes that spoke of too much sun and stress, and a small scar on his jaw that was almost hidden by stubble. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" Jake asked quietly as he cleaned the wound on her arm. The question was casual, but Sarah could hear the professional curiosity behind it. She tensed automatically. This was the question she had been dreading. "Self-defense classes," she lied smoothly. It was her standard answer, the one that satisfied most people without revealing anything real about her past. But Jake's hands paused for just a moment and she realized he wasn't buying it. "Those were some pretty advanced self-defense moves," he said carefully, applying antiseptic that made her wince. "The way you disarm that guy with the knife, that's not something you learn in a weekend workshop." His tone wasn't accusatory, just observant. Sarah got the feeling that very little escaped this man's notice. The silence stretched between them as Jake continued working on her injuries. Sarah's mind raced, trying to decide how much truth she could afford to share. She had spent years building a carefully constructed life as a nurse, hiding the parts of her past that didn't fit with who she was supposed to be. But sitting here in an alley, bleeding and exhausted, those carefully built walls felt fragile. "My father was in the military," she finally said, which wasn't exactly a lie. It just wasn't the whole truth. Jake's hands stilled completely this time, and she could feel his attention focus on her like a laser. "What branch?" he asked softly. Sarah hesitated. Once she started down this path, there would be no going back. But something about Jake's calm presence made her want to trust him, even though every instinct warned her against it. "Special Forces," she whispered. Jake finished bandaging her arm and moved to examine the cut above her eye. "And he taught you to fight?" "Among other things." Sarah's voice was barely audible now. The memories she had spent years suppressing were threatening to surface, brought up by this stranger's gentle questions and genuine concern. Her father had indeed been Special Forces, but that wasn't where her training had really come from. Sarah. The way Jake said her name made her look up at him in surprise. She hadn't told him her name. "I heard one of those guys use it," he explained, seeing her confusion. "Look, I don't know what your story is, but I recognize military training when I see it. And what you did back there, that wasn't just Daddy teaching his little girl some basic moves." Sarah felt her carefully constructed defenses crumbling. This man saw too much, understood too much. It was terrifying and oddly liberating at the same time. "It's complicated," she said weakly. "Most things worth talking about are." Jake sat back on his heels, giving her space. "I'm not trying to pry into your business, but if you're out here alone dealing with situations like this," he gestured toward the unconscious men, "maybe you don't have to be." The offer hung in the air between them. Sarah had been alone for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to have someone care about her well-being, without wanting something in return. But accepting help meant opening up, and opening up meant risking exposure of secrets she had killed to protect. "Why do you care?" she asked, her voice sharper than she intended. "You don't even know me." Jake was quiet for a long moment, and Sarah could see him weighing his words carefully. "Because 5 years ago I was in a place where I thought I had to handle everything alone too, and it almost destroyed me." His eyes met hers, and she saw a pain there that matched her own. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is let someone else help carry the load. Sarah wanted to argue, to maintain the walls that had kept her safe for so long. But she was tired, bone-deep, soul-deep tired of carrying everything by herself. The weight of her secrets, her past, her carefully maintained double life as a nurse who could kill with her bare hands. It was all too much. "I was a Marine," she said suddenly, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "Force Recon, 3 tours in Afghanistan." The admission felt like stepping off a cliff, terrifying and final. Jake's expression didn't change, but she saw understanding flicker in his eyes. "When did you get out?" 4 years ago. Sarah's hands were shaking again, but not from the cold or shock this time. I came home broken, angry, and completely lost. Became a nurse because I thought maybe if I saved lives instead of taking them, I could find some kind of peace. And did you? Find peace? Sarah looked around the alley, at the unconscious men who had tried to hurt her, at her blood on the pavement, at this stranger who had appeared out of nowhere to help her. I thought I had, until tonight. Jake finished cleaning the cut above Sarah's eye and sat back to look at his work. There, he said quietly. That should hold until you can get proper medical attention. He packed his supplies back into his kit with practiced efficiency, but made no move to leave. The rain had slowed to a gentle drizzle, and the alley felt oddly peaceful despite the violence that had occurred there. What happens now? Sarah asked, gesturing toward the three unconscious men. She'd been so focused on surviving the attack and then dealing with her injuries that she hadn't thought about the aftermath. These men had tried to assault her, and she had defended herself with potentially lethal force. The legal implications were starting to sink in. That depends on what you want to happen, Jake replied. We could call the police, let them sort it out. Self-defense is pretty clear-cut in this case. He paused, studying her face. Or if you'd rather avoid the questions and paperwork, these guys will wake up with splitting headaches and hopefully think twice before bothering women again. Sarah appreciated that he was giving her the choice instead of making assumptions about what she wanted. Too many people in her life had made decisions for her without consulting her feelings. I just want to go home, she said honestly. I want to pretend this never happened. Jake nodded, understanding. I get that. But Sarah, if you don't mind me saying, running from what happened tonight isn't going to make it go away. And if these guys make a habit of this kind of behavior, they'll just find another victim. The weight of responsibility settled on Sarah's shoulders. She had always been someone who protected others, first as a Marine and now as a nurse. The idea that these men might hurt someone else because she was too afraid to report them was almost unbearable. But getting involved with the police meant questions, background checks, and possible exposure of parts of her past she wasn't ready to reveal. It's not that simple, she said, frustration creeping into her voice. I have reasons for keeping a low profile. Jake was quiet for a moment, clearly thinking. What if there was another way? He asked finally. What if we could make sure these guys face consequences without you having to go through official channels? Sarah looked at him sharply. What do you mean? I mean that sometimes justice happens outside the courtroom. Jake's voice was carefully neutral, but Sarah caught the implication. These men chose to prey on someone they thought was defenseless. Maybe they need to understand what it feels like to be on the receiving end of that kind of fear. The suggestion should have horrified her. Sarah had worked hard to leave her darker impulses behind, to channel her skills into healing instead of hurting. But sitting here in this alley, looking at the men who had tried to assault her, she felt the old anger rising. The rage that had driven her through 3 combat tours, that had made her so effective at her job, was still there beneath the surface. You're talking about vigilante justice, she said, testing the words. I'm talking about making sure they understand the consequences of their actions, Jake corrected. Sometimes fear is the only language predators understand. Sarah studied his face in the dim light. This man was offering her something she hadn't realized she wanted, the chance to take control, to ensure that justice was served even if it wasn't official. But it would mean crossing a line she had drawn for herself when she left the military. Why would you help me with something like that? She asked. You don't even know me. Jake was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. Because I've seen what happens when good people do nothing. And because sometimes the system fails the people it's supposed to protect. He looked directly at her. You saved yourself tonight, Sarah. But how many other women won't be able to do the same? The question hung in the air between them. Sarah thought about her fellow nurses, the young women she saw walking alone at night, the victims of assault she had treated in the emergency room. How many of them could have been spared if someone had stopped their attackers before they found new victims? What are you suggesting exactly? She asked, though part of her already knew the answer. I'm suggesting that these 3 learn what it feels like to be helpless, to be afraid, to understand that there are consequences for their actions even if the law can't touch them. Jake's voice was steady, professional, and I'm suggesting that maybe you and I could work together to make sure other predators get the same message. Sarah felt something shift inside her, like tumblers falling into place in a lock she had thought was permanently sealed. The careful, quiet life she had built as a nurse suddenly felt like a costume she had been wearing, hiding who she really was underneath. Maybe it was time to stop pretending that she could leave her warrior self behind completely. "You're talking about becoming something outside the law," she said, slowly. "I'm talking about becoming something the law can't be," Jake replied. "Swift. Sure. Final." The word final sent a chill through Sarah. She had taken lives before in service to her country and in defense of her fellow Marines. But that was war, with clear rules of engagement and chain of command. What Jake was suggesting was something else entirely, a decision to step outside society's rules and become judge, jury, and potentially executioner. But as she looked at the 3 unconscious men who had tried to assault her, Sarah realized that part of her had already made the decision. The part that was tired of being afraid, tired of hiding, tired of pretending that the world was a safe place where justice always prevailed. The part that remembered what it felt like to be strong, to be feared by those who deserved fear. "If we did this," she said carefully, "there would be no going back." Jake nodded solemnly. "No, there wouldn't. But Sarah, there's no going back from tonight anyway. You can't unsee what these men were willing to do. You can't unfeel the satisfaction of stopping them. The only question is whether you're going to let that be the end of the story, or the beginning of a new chapter." 3 weeks had passed since that night in the alley, and Sarah found herself sitting across from Jake in a small coffee shop downtown. To anyone watching, they looked like an ordinary couple on a casual date. Jake wore civilian clothes that couldn't quite hide his military bearing, and Sarah had chosen a simple sweater that concealed the fading bruises on her arms. But their conversation was anything but ordinary. "I've been thinking about what you said," Sarah began, stirring her coffee nervously. The past 3 weeks had been filled with restless nights and constant second-guessing. She'd returned to her job at the hospital, trying to fall back into her routine, but everything felt different now. Every assault victim who came through the emergency room reminded her of her own attack, and of the choice Jake had offered her. And Jake's voice was patient, giving her space to work through her thoughts. "I can't stop thinking about them, the men from that night." Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. "Not because I'm afraid of them, but because I keep wondering who else they might hurt. I've been researching similar attacks in the area, and the pattern is clear. These weren't random crimes of opportunity. They're part of something bigger." Jake leaned forward slightly, his interest clearly piqued. "What did you find?" Sarah pulled out her phone and showed him a series of news articles she had bookmarked. 7 similar attacks in the past 6 months, all in this general area. Young women walking alone at night. Always 3 attackers, always following the same pattern. The police have connected some of them, but they don't have enough evidence to make arrests. Have any of the victims been able to identify their attackers? 2 of them tried, but the men wore masks during those attacks. They got smarter after the first few incidents. Sarah's jaw tightened. "The most recent victim before me was a college student. She's still in therapy, too afraid to leave her apartment alone." Jake was quiet for a moment, processing the information. "So we're not just talking about 3 opportunistic criminals. We're talking about a predatory group that's been systematically targeting women." "Exactly." Sarah felt a familiar surge of anger, the same protective instinct that had driven her to excel in the Marines. "And the police are bound by rules of evidence, due process, all the things that let monsters like this slip through the cracks. But we wouldn't be," Jake said quietly. The words hung between them, loaded with implication. Sarah had been wrestling with this exact thought for weeks. As a Marine, she had operated under strict rules of engagement, but those rules had been designed for conventional warfare against recognized enemies. What Jake was proposing was something different, a shadow war against predators who hid among civilian populations. "I went back to the alley last night," Sarah admitted. "I wanted to see if I could find any evidence the police might have missed." Jake's eyebrows rose slightly. "And did you?" "Better. I found them." Sarah's voice carried a note of grim satisfaction. "They're using the area as a hunting ground. I watched them for 2 hours, seeing how they operate. They scout for targets at the bars and clubs, then follow women who leave alone. If I hadn't seen them first that night, they would have successfully assaulted me. Are you suggesting we take them down? I'm suggesting we stop them permanently." The words came out harder than Sarah had intended, revealing the depth of her anger. "But not just them. If we're going to do this, we need to think bigger. These three are just one cell in a larger problem. Jake studied her face carefully. Sarah, what you're talking about, it's not just about justice anymore. It's about becoming something the system can't account for. Once we cross that line, there's no legal protection, no backup, no official sanction. We become outlaws. We become necessary, Sarah corrected. The system failed those 7 women who were attacked. The system failed me. How many more victims are there going to be while we wait for official justice to catch up? The intensity in her voice seemed to surprise Jake. He had seen her fight, had witnessed her skills, but this was the first time he was seeing the full depth of her commitment to this path. You've really thought this through? I've done more than think about it. I've planned it. Sarah pulled out a small notebook and opened it to reveal detailed observations, sketches of the alley area, and what looked like tactical assessments. I know where they meet, how they communicate, what their routine is. I know which bars they frequent and what type of victims they prefer. Jake flipped through the pages, his expression growing more serious with each entry. The level of detail was impressive, and more than a little concerning. This is military-grade intelligence gathering, Sarah. How long have you been watching them? Every night for the past week. I told the hospital I needed some time off to recover from the attack. It wasn't entirely a lie. She had needed time to recover, just not in the way her supervisor assumed. And they haven't noticed you? Sarah smiled grimly. I learned surveillance from the best. They have no idea I exist. Jake closed the notebook and looked at her directly. You're serious about this? This isn't just anger talking. You've made a decision. I made the decision that night in the alley. I've just been working up the courage to follow through. Sarah met his gaze steadily. The question is whether you're still willing to help me. The coffee shop buzzed with normal conversation around them. People complaining about work, making weekend plans, living ordinary lives. None of them had any idea that 2 military veterans were sitting just a few feet away, planning to become something that existed outside the law. The contrast between the mundane setting and the gravity of their conversation felt surreal. If we do this, Jake said slowly, we need rules, boundaries, otherwise we become no better than the people we're hunting. I agree. No innocent casualties, no collateral damage, and we only target predators who the system can't or won't stop. Sarah had clearly thought about this aspect as well. We're not vigilantes looking for revenge. We're soldiers fighting a war that nobody else is willing to fight. Jake nodded slowly. And what about our day jobs? Our normal lives? We maintain them as cover. I stay at the hospital. You continue whatever assignment brought you here. But at night we become something else. Something the monsters check their closets for, Jake said quietly. Exactly. Sarah felt a sense of rightness settle over her, like a puzzle piece finally finding its proper place. So are you in? Jake was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant as he weighed the magnitude of what Sarah was proposing. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of hard-won experience. 2 months ago I lost my best friend to an IED in Syria. Marcus had a wife and 2 little girls back home. You know what the hardest part was? Coming back and seeing predators walking free in the country he died protecting. Sarah could hear the pain in his voice, the same frustration she felt every day working in the hospital. What happened? His wife Jennifer was being stalked by her ex-boyfriend. The guy had a history of domestic violence, multiple restraining orders, but he kept finding ways around the system. Jennifer was terrified, but the police said their hands were tied unless he actually hurt her. Jake's hands clenched involuntarily. 3 weeks after Marcus's funeral, the ex broke into Jennifer's house. She's alive, but barely. The girls saw the whole thing. The story hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had seen too many victims of domestic violence come through the emergency room, had listened to too many stories of systems that failed to protect the innocent. Where is he now? Prison, finally. But Jennifer's in therapy, the girls have nightmares, and their whole family is destroyed. Jake's voice was tight with controlled anger. Marcus died fighting monsters overseas while monsters at home were destroying his family. That's when I realized that some wars don't end just because you come home. Sarah reached across the table and touched his hand briefly. I'm sorry about your friend, and I'm sorry about what happened to his family. The thing is, I could have stopped it. I knew the guy was escalating, knew the system wasn't going to protect them. But I followed the rules, trusted in official channels, and a good woman and 2 innocent children paid the price for my inaction. Jake looked directly at her. I won't make that mistake again. The commitment in his voice matched her own, and Sarah felt the last of her doubts fall away. They weren't just talking about vigilante justice anymore. They were talking about a calling, a purpose that both of them had been searching for since leaving the military. So we're really doing this. We're really doing this. Jake pulled out his own phone and showed her a series of photos. I've been doing some research too. The three men from the alley are small-time players in a larger network. There's a group that's been trafficking women through this city for years, using local predators like our friends as recruiters and enforcers. Sarah studied the photos, surveillance shots of various men, what looked like warehouse locations, and several young women who appeared to be in distress. How did you get these? I still have contacts in the intelligence community, people who are frustrated with the limitations of official operations. Jake's smile was grim. Turns out we're not the only ones who think the system needs some unofficial help. The implications were staggering. What had started as Sarah's desire for justice against three attackers was revealing itself to be part of a much larger problem. Are you saying there are others like us? I'm saying there are others who understand that some threats require unconventional responses, but most of them are constrained by their official positions. Jake leaned forward. We're not. We're ghosts, Sarah. We can go places and do things that official operators can't. Sarah felt a familiar thrill, the same adrenaline rush she had experienced on her most dangerous missions in Afghanistan. This was what she had been missing in her civilian life, the sense of purpose, the knowledge that her skills could make a real difference. What's our first target? Jake flipped to a specific photo showing a well-dressed man in his 50s getting out of an expensive car. David Kostov. He runs the local trafficking operation under the cover of several legitimate businesses. The three men who attacked you work for him, recruiting women who won't be missed. How many women? Conservative estimate? Dozens over the past 3 years. The police have been investigating him for 18 months with no results. He's smart, careful, and has enough money to buy his way out of most problems. Sarah studied the photo, memorizing every detail of the man's face. Not this problem. There's more. Kostov has protection, both legal and illegal. He pays off some cops, intimidates others, and has a crew of enforcers who make sure nobody talks. Jake showed her additional photos of heavily built men with prison tattoos. Taking him down won't be a simple matter of confronting him in an alley. Good. Sarah's smile was predatory. I was hoping for a challenge. Jake laughed, but there was no humor in it. You know, when I first saw you in that alley, I thought I was helping a victim. Turns out I was meeting a kindred spirit. Maybe that's what I needed. Someone who understood. Sarah closed her notebook and looked around the coffee shop one more time. After tonight, these normal, peaceful settings would feel like foreign countries to her. She was about to cross a line that would separate her permanently from the ordinary world. When do we start? Tonight. Kostov has a meeting at one of his warehouses. Perfect opportunity to gather intelligence and maybe send a message to his organization. Jake's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. But Sarah, once we take this first step, everything changes. Your life as a regular person ends tonight. Sarah thought about her small apartment, her job at the hospital, the quiet routine she had built over the past 4 years. It had been a good life, a safe life, but it had never felt complete. There had always been something missing, a sense that she was hiding from her true nature rather than embracing it. My life as a regular person ended the night those men attacked me, she said quietly. Tonight I just stopped pretending otherwise. Jake nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Then let's go to war. They left the coffee shop separately, just 2 more anonymous faces in the evening crowd. But Sarah felt different walking down the sidewalk. More alert, more alive than she had felt in years. She was about to become something dangerous, something that existed in the shadows between civilization and chaos. It should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like coming home. In a few hours, she would put on dark clothes instead of scrubs, carry weapons instead of medical supplies, and use her skills to take life rather than save it. The transformation should have felt like a betrayal of everything she had worked to become. Instead, it felt like finally admitting who she had always been underneath. The warehouse district was eerily quiet at midnight, with only the occasional sound of distant traffic and the rhythmic dripping of water from rusted gutters. Sarah crouched behind a shipping container, her dark clothing making her nearly invisible in the shadows. Across the narrow street, Jake was positioned with a clear view of the warehouse entrance where Kostov was scheduled to meet his lieutenants. They had spent hours planning this reconnaissance mission, studying building layouts, escape routes, and guard positions. But no amount of planning could eliminate the tension Sarah felt as she watched armed men patrol the perimeter of Kostov's operation. This was different from her military missions. There would be no air support, no backup, no official sanction if things went wrong. Through her earpiece, Jake's voice was barely audible. Target vehicle approaching from the south. Black Mercedes, license plate matches intelligence. Sarah adjusted her position to get a better view as the expensive car pulled up to the warehouse. David Kostov emerged from the passenger seat, followed by two bodyguards who scanned the area with professional paranoia. Even from a distance, Sarah could see that these weren't street thugs. They moved with the discipline of trained security personnel. "I count 6 hostiles total," Jake's voice crackled softly. 2 at the target, 4 on perimeter patrol. All armed. Sarah had already made the same assessment. Taking down 6 armed men would require careful planning and perfect execution. One mistake could turn their intelligence-gathering mission into a lethal confrontation they weren't prepared for. "Hold position. Let's see what we can learn before we make any moves." Kostov and his entourage disappeared into the warehouse, leaving the exterior guards to maintain their patrol pattern. Sarah used the opportunity to move closer, slipping between containers with the fluid grace of someone trained in urban combat. Her destination was a broken window on the warehouse's second floor that would give her a view of the meeting below. The climb to the window was treacherous, rusted fire escape ladder that groaned with every step, broken glass that could slice through her tactical gloves, and the constant risk of being spotted by the roving guards. But Sarah had infiltrated far more dangerous positions in Afghanistan, and her confidence grew with each careful movement. From her elevated position, she could see directly into the main floor of the warehouse. Kostov stood at the center of a circle of chairs speaking animatedly to 5 other men. But it wasn't the meeting that made Sarah's blood run cold. It was what she saw in the far corner of the building. Cages. 6 metal cages, each containing a young woman who appeared to be barely conscious. The women were dressed in torn clothing, and even from her distant vantage point, Sarah could see they had been beaten. This wasn't just about recruitment or intimidation. She was looking at active human trafficking in progress. "Jake," she whispered into her microphone, "we have a problem. There are victims in the building. 6 women in cages." The pause before Jake responded told her he understood the implications immediately. Their reconnaissance mission had just become a rescue operation, whether they were prepared for it or not. "Can you identify any other exits?" Sarah scanned the warehouse layout, looking for alternative escape routes that could be used to evacuate the victims. Loading dock on the east side, emergency exit on the north wall, and what looks like a service tunnel in the basement level. "But Jake, those women look drugged. They're not going to be able to move quickly." "How many guards inside?" Sarah counted carefully, watching the movement patterns below. 3 plus Kostov and his bodyguards. But there's something else. I can see weapons caches throughout the building. This isn't just a meeting place, it's an armory. The situation was escalating beyond anything they had planned for. What should have been a simple surveillance operation was revealing the scope of Kostov's operation and the immediate danger to innocent lives. Sarah felt the familiar weight of command decisions, the knowledge that people would live or die based on choices made in the next few minutes. "We can't leave those women," she said quietly, though she knew Jake was thinking the same thing. "I know, but we're outnumbered and outgunned. If we go in now, we might save 6 lives but lose the chance to stop Kostov permanently." It was the kind of impossible choice that had haunted Sarah's military career. Tactical wisdom versus moral imperative. Every instinct told her to move immediately, to use whatever advantage surprise might give them. But Jake was right about the larger picture. If they failed tonight, Kostov would disappear and dozens more women would suffer. Then Sarah saw something that made the decision for her. One of the guards was approaching the cages with what looked like a syringe. Whatever he was planning to inject into those women, it wasn't medical care. "Jake, we're out of time. Guard is moving toward the victims with some kind of drug. Damn it." Jake's frustration was clear even through the static. "Okay, new plan. I'm going to create a distraction at the main entrance. Draw as many guards as possible away from the building. You get inside, neutralize anyone who stays behind, and get those women out through the loading dock. That's suicide. You can't take on 6 armed men alone. I don't plan to fight them, just lead them on a chase away from the warehouse. Give me 5 minutes to get into position, then move. Sarah wanted to argue, but she could see the guard with the syringe getting closer to the first cage. Time was running out for a debate about tactics. Jake, if this goes wrong, it won't go wrong. We're too good at what we do. His voice carried a confidence that Sarah wished she felt. See you at the extraction point in 20 minutes. The connection went dead, leaving Sarah alone with the weight of the mission. Below her, Kostov's meeting continued while one of his men prepared to inject unknown substances into helpless women. The juxtaposition of casual business, discussion, and human suffering crystallized. Everything Sarah hated about predators like this, they treated human lives as commodities while maintaining the facade of legitimate business. 5 minutes felt like an eternity as Sarah watched the scene below, counting guards, memorizing positions, and planning her route through the building. When Jake's distraction finally came, it was spectacular. An explosion echoed from the direction of the main entrance, followed by shouts and the sound of running feet. 4 of the 6 guards immediately rushed toward the noise, leaving only 2 men to watch the warehouse interior. Kostov himself seemed torn between fleeing and protecting his assets, ultimately choosing to stay while sending his bodyguards to investigate the disturbance. Sarah moved immediately, rappelling down from her window position with practiced silence. Her boots hit the warehouse floor just as the guard with the syringe reached the first cage. He never saw her coming. The takedown was swift and silent, a chokehold that rendered him unconscious without alerting anyone else in the building. Sarah caught his falling body and lowered it gently to the floor, then grabbed the syringe and keys from his belt. The women in the cages were barely conscious, confirming Sarah's suspicion that they had been heavily drugged. Getting them out of the building would require carrying them, which meant neutralizing the remaining guards first. Sarah moved through the warehouse like a shadow, using containers and machinery as cover, while she stalked her next target. The second guard was easier. Isolated near the weapons cache, focused on the radio chatter about Jake's distraction, Sarah approached from behind and used a sleeper hold that dropped him in seconds. 2 down, but Kostov and his remaining bodyguard were still somewhere in the building. As Sarah approached the cages, she could hear Kostov's voice echoing from an office area on the 2nd floor. He was speaking rapidly into a phone, probably calling for reinforcements or trying to coordinate with the guards chasing Jake. Sarah realized she had minutes at most before the situation became impossible. The keys worked on the first cage, and Sarah gently lifted the unconscious woman inside. She was young, maybe 20, with bruises that spoke of systematic abuse. As Sarah carried her toward the loading dock, she felt the familiar surge of protective rage that had driven her through the worst battles of her military career. One by one, she moved the women from their cages to the loading dock, working with the efficient precision of someone trained to function under extreme pressure. But as she carried the last victim, she heard footsteps on the metal stairs leading down from Kostov's office. Time had run out. Sarah gently placed the last woman near the loading dock with the others, then turned to face the sound of approaching footsteps. Kostov appeared at the top of the stairs, flanked by his remaining bodyguard. Both men held weapons, but their posture suggested confusion rather than immediate aggression. They hadn't yet processed what they were seeing. "Who the hell are you?" Kostov's voice carried the arrogance of someone accustomed to being in control. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Sarah stepped into the light, letting them see her clearly for the first time. She made no move toward her own weapon, instead standing calmly among the rescued women like an avenging angel. "I know exactly what I've done. The question is whether you understand what's about to happen to you." The bodyguard raised his gun, but Kostov held up a hand to stop him. There was something in Sarah's demeanor that suggested she wasn't afraid of their weapons, and smart predators learned to recognize when they were facing someone more dangerous than themselves. "You're military," Kostov said, studying her stance and bearing. "Special forces, I'd guess. What's your interest in my business?" "Your business involves hurting innocent people. That makes it my business." Sarah's voice was calm, almost conversational. "But we're not here to negotiate. We're here to end you." Kostov laughed, though it sounded forced. "We? I don't see anyone else." "And you're outnumbered." As if on cue, Jake's voice echoed from the darkness near the main entrance. "Actually, she's not." He emerged from the shadows, having somehow made his way back into the building while the other guards were still chasing phantoms outside. His weapon was drawn and trained on the bodyguard. 2 against 2, Kostov said, though his confidence was clearly shaken. Still not great odds for you. My men will be back soon, and then you'll be trapped in here with nowhere to run. We're not planning to run, Sarah said quietly. We're planning to finish what we started. The standoff stretched for several tense seconds with both sides calculating odds and options. But Sarah wasn't interested in prolonging the confrontation. She had come here to stop Kostov permanently, and the 6 drugged women behind her were proof enough of his guilt. Last chance, she said, taking a step forward. Surrender now and you live long enough to face justice. Keep fighting and you don't. The bodyguard made the decision for everyone by swinging his weapon toward Jake. It was the last mistake he would ever make. Sarah moved with fluid precision, closing the distance to Kostov while Jake neutralized the bodyguard with a single, silence shot. Kostov found himself face to face with Sarah, her knife at his throat before he could process what had happened. His gun clattered to the floor, forgotten in his shock at the speed of her attack. Please, he gasped, finally understanding that his wealth and connections couldn't save him from the situation. I can pay you. Whatever you want. Money, information, anything. I want you to understand something, Sarah said softly, her blade pressing against his skin just hard enough to draw a thin line of blood. Those women you caged are someone's daughters, someone's sisters. They trusted the wrong person and ended up here because monsters like you see them as commodities. It's just business, Kostov whispered, his earlier arrogance completely gone. I never hurt them personally. You enabled their torture. You profited from their suffering. You destroyed their lives for money. Sarah's voice carried the weight of every victim she had ever seen, every life that predators like Kostov had ruined. That makes you worse than the people who actually pulled the triggers. Jake finished securing the area and moved to check on the rescued women. They're alive, but they need medical attention. We should call for ambulances once we're clear. Kostov seized on this apparent mercy. See, you're not killers. You're trying to save people. Let me go and I'll disappear. You'll never see me again. Sarah almost smiled at his naivety. You're right about one thing. We are trying to save people. But saving future victims means making sure you can never hurt anyone again. The realization of his fate finally hit Kostov, and he began to struggle desperately. But Sarah's grip was iron strong, honed by years of combat training and fueled by righteous anger. This is for every woman you trafficked, every life you destroyed, every family you tore apart. The knife moved with surgical precision, and Kostov's struggles ceased. Sarah stepped back, looking down at the body of a man who had caused immeasurable suffering. She felt no remorse, no guilt, only the satisfaction of a job completed and justice served. Jake appeared at her shoulder. How do you feel? Sarah considered the question seriously. She had just crossed a line that separated her permanently from civilian life, had become something that existed outside the law and social norms. She should have felt horror, regret, or at least uncertainty about what she had become. Instead, she felt complete. For the first time since leaving the military, she felt like she was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do. I feel like we're just getting started. They worked quickly to prepare the scene, making it look like the result of a gang war rather than surgical elimination. The rescued women would be found by police within hours, along with evidence that would shut down Kostov's entire operation. But the man himself would simply vanish, becoming a cautionary tale whispered among other predators. As they prepared to leave, Sarah looked back at the warehouse one last time. 6 women would go home to their families because of what had happened here tonight. Dozens of future victims would be spared because Kostov's network was finished. The cost had been one life, a life spent destroying others. Ready? Jake asked, shouldering his pack. Sarah nodded, following him into the darkness outside. They had work to do, a war to fight, and justice to serve. The night was just beginning, and somewhere in the city other predators were hunting new victims. But now they had something to fear. Shadows with military training and no patience for legal technicalities. The nurse who had walked into that alley 3 weeks ago was gone forever. In her place was something harder, more dangerous, and infinitely more necessary. Sarah Chen had found her true calling, and the monsters of the world would learn to fear the darkness she and Jake brought with them. Their war had begun.